Do you clear your throat more than 10 times a day? Do you wake up every morning with mucus stuck in your throat before you've even had your first cup of coffee? Have you tried cough syrups, antihistamines, steam, nasal sprays, and still feel that something is always there? That no matter what you do, by the next morning it's back, exactly where it was. Here is a number that might surprise you. Over 60% of adults over 60 suffer from chronic mucus accumulation, persistent phlegm in the throat and lungs that commercial products manage temporarily but never resolve at the root. 60%. That is not a rare condition. That is the majority of people in your age group waking up every single morning to the same problem. And the reason those products never fully work is something almost no doctor takes the time to explain in a 15-minute appointment. Chronic mucus has 3 simultaneous causes, and most treatments address only one. There is a combination, 2 ingredients, both of which you probably already have at home right now, that addresses all 3 causes simultaneously. That breaks down the hardened mucus layers that commercial syrups cannot touch. That restores the natural clearing mechanism of your airways. And that has been used medicinally for over 2,000 years, now fully documented by modern pulmonary science. I am Dr. Gene Walker, pulmonologist and integrative medicine specialist. And in this video, I show you exactly what these 2 ingredients are, how to combine them in a precise morning protocol, and why the preparation matters just as much as the ingredients themselves. Stay until the end, because at the end, I show you the mistake that almost everyone makes with natural expectorants. A mistake that turns a genuinely powerful remedy into something completely ineffective. And it is a mistake you are probably making right now without knowing it. Before I continue, let me tell you something that should have been explained to you clearly and probably never was. Chronic mucus is not a character flaw. It is not simply allergies. It is not simply aging. And it is absolutely not something you have to accept as a permanent feature of your life after 60. For decades, the medical conversation around chronic mucus has been reduced to 2 options: take a syrup or take an antihistamine. If those don't work, take both. If those don't work, see a specialist who will likely prescribe the same things in stronger doses. What almost never happens in that conversation is an explanation of why the mucus is there in the first place, what biological mechanisms are producing it, what is keeping it from clearing, and what actually addresses those mechanisms rather than just temporarily masking the symptom. The 2 ingredients I show you today do not mask the symptom, they address the causes. All 3 of them. In a preparation that costs less than $5 and takes 3 minutes to make. That is what conventional medicine has not been telling you. Not because of conspiracy, simply because a 15-minute appointment does not allow for the explanation you are about to hear. I am Dr. Gene Walker. I want to tell you about a patient. I will call him Mr. Harold, 67 years old, retired engineer. Mr. Harold came to my clinic after 3 years of what he described as a throat that is never clear. He woke up coughing every morning. He cleared his throat constantly during conversations. He had stopped going to church because he was embarrassed by the noise he made. He had tried 4 different over-the-counter products, 2 courses of antibiotics for suspected infections, and a nasal steroid spray. None of them had resolved the problem for more than a few days. When I evaluated him, his lungs were structurally healthy. No COPD, no asthma diagnosis, no significant allergies. What I found was a pattern I see constantly in patients his age: chronic, low-grade airway inflammation triggering excess mucus production combined with impaired mucociliary clearance that meant even normal amounts of mucus were not being swept out efficiently. I asked him to do one thing differently. Every morning, 30 minutes before breakfast, a specific preparation of 2 ingredients. Nothing else changed. 3 weeks later, he called my office. He said, "Dr. Walker, I sang in church on Sunday for the first time in 3 years." Subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. Every week we publish information like this, always free. And leave me a comment with this phrase: "My lungs deserve to breathe freely. I'm starting the protocol tomorrow morning." That tells me you are here, and it tells me who I am talking to. To understand why this two-ingredient combination works when everything else has only worked halfway, you need to understand something that most people were never taught about mucus. Mucus is not your enemy. Mucus is your body's protection system, one of the most sophisticated defense mechanisms your respiratory tract has. The cells lining your airways, goblet cells, produce approximately 100 milliliters of mucus every single day. In a healthy respiratory system, this mucus is thin, clear, and invisible to you. It traps dust, bacteria, viruses, and pollutants. And then, this is the part most people don't know, microscopic hair-like structures called cilia sweep it constantly upward toward your throat, where you swallow it without ever noticing. You have been swallowing mucus every day of your life without realizing it. A perfectly functioning respiratory system is completely silent. No throat clearing, no morning congestion, no awareness of mucus at all. So when mucus becomes a problem, when you feel it, when it accumulates, when it refuses to clear, it means something has disrupted this elegant system. Not one thing, usually three things simultaneously. Think of healthy mucus as a flowing river, clear, moving, constantly renewed. Chronic mucus is that same river turned into a swamp. The problem is not the water itself. The problem is that the flow has stopped, and the water has changed quality. It has become thick, stagnant, and it has started to host things that a flowing river never would. That swamp is what you are feeling every morning. The three enemies that turn your respiratory river into a swamp. The first enemy is goblet cell overproduction. Goblet cells are the mucus-producing cells that line your airways. In normal conditions, they produce just enough mucus to keep the airways moist and protected. But when the airway lining is chronically inflamed, from irritants, from silent acid reflux that reaches the throat during the night, from air quality, from the low-grade inflammatory state that increases after 60, the goblet cells respond to that inflammation as if to a permanent threat. They go into overdrive. They produce more mucus than the clearing system can handle. The result is accumulation, not because something is wrong with the mucus itself, but because there is simply more of it than the system was designed to manage. After 60, the inflammatory baseline of the body rises naturally. Goblet cell overproduction becomes the default state for many people, not because of any specific illness, but because chronic low-grade inflammation has become the new normal. The second enemy is biofilm formation. This is the one that explains why your chronic mucus feels different from a normal cold. It is thicker, stickier. It does not respond to coughing the way normal mucus does. It feels like something is cemented to the walls of your throat and airways, rather than simply sitting in them. That sensation is accurate. Biofilm is mucus that is hardened into a protective matrix, a structured community of bacteria enclosed in a self-produced polymer shell. Inside that shell, bacteria are protected from the immune system, from antibiotics, and from commercial expectorants. Studies have shown that bacteria inside a biofilm are up to 1,000 times more resistant to treatment than the same bacteria floating freely. This is why chronic mucus returns within hours of taking a syrup. The syrup thins the liquid layer on top of the biofilm, and you feel temporary relief. But the biofilm matrix itself is untouched, and within hours, the liquid layer has reformed over it, and the congestion is back exactly where it was. The third enemy is mucociliary failure. Remember those cilia, the microscopic hair-like projections that sweep mucus upward and out of your airways? After 60, their beat frequency naturally declines. They move more slowly, less efficiently. Mucus that would have been swept away in a healthy, younger airway now lingers. Dehydration slows ciliary action further. A history of smoking damages cilia significantly, and that damage does not fully reverse even years after stopping. Certain antihistamines, the ones millions of people take for allergies, actually suppress ciliary movement as a side effect. Mouth breathing bypasses the nose, which humidifies and conditions air for the airways, and exposes cilia to dry, unfiltered air that impairs their function. Three enemies: overproduction, biofilm, mucociliary failure. All three running simultaneously in most people with chronic mucus. And here is the critical point. Commercial expectorants address exactly one of the three. Before I show you the two ingredients, I need you to understand exactly why everything you have tried before has only worked halfway. Because once you understand the three-mechanism problem, you will immediately see why this combination is different from anything you have used before. The most common active ingredient in over-the-counter expectorants is guaifenesin. It is in almost every commercial mucus product, under dozens of brand names, in syrups and tablets and extended-release capsules. And guaifenesin does one thing. It reduces mucus viscosity. It thins mucus. That is genuinely useful for one specific situation, acute congestion from a cold or flu, where normal mucus has temporarily become too thick because of infection and inflammation. In that context, guaifenesin works well. The mucus thins, it moves more easily, the cilia can clear it, relief is felt within hours. But chronic mucus is not acute congestion. Chronic mucus involves biofilm, which guaifenesin cannot penetrate or dissolve. It involves mucociliary failure, which guaifenesin does nothing to address. And it involves ongoing goblet cell overproduction driven by inflammation, which guaifenesin does not touch. So the syrup thins the surface layer. You feel better for a few hours. The biofilm remains intact underneath. The cilia are still moving slowly. The goblet cells are still overproducing. And by the next morning, you are back where you started. This is not a failure of the product to do what it claims. It is a failure of the product to address what the problem actually is. Antihistamines make it worse. They dry mucus, which sounds helpful but is not. Dried mucus is thicker mucus. Thicker mucus is harder to clear. And antihistamines suppress ciliary activity, further impairing the one mechanism that would naturally clear the mucus if it were functioning correctly. The two-ingredient combination I'm about to show you costs less than $5 combined. You may already have both of them in your kitchen right now, but the way they work together and the way you prepare them is something almost no one knows. The two ingredients that clear the phlegm from your throat and lungs are raw honey and fresh thyme. Not commercial honey, not dried thyme in a supermarket tea bag. Raw, unprocessed honey and fresh thyme leaves or high-quality loose-dried thyme from an herb store or pharmacy. The difference between raw and commercial honey is not a matter of taste preference. It is a matter of chemistry. Commercial honey is pasteurized, heated to 70 degrees Celsius or above to extend shelf life and prevent crystallization. That heating process destroys methyl glyoxal, the compound responsible for honey's anti-biofilm properties. It destroys the enzyme glucose oxidase, which produces the hydrogen peroxide that kills bacteria. And it destroys the majority of the flavonoids that give honey its anti-inflammatory action on goblet cells. What remains after pasteurization is the flavor and the sweetness. The therapeutic properties are gone. A jar of commercial honey on the supermarket shelf has been a jar of warm sugar water since the day it was processed. Raw honey, unheated, unfiltered, in its natural state, retains all three groups of active compounds. And it is those compounds that do what no commercial expectorant can do. The first ingredient, raw honey, works through three precise mechanisms on chronic mucus. The first mechanism is anti-biofilm disruption. Methylglyoxal, concentrated in raw honey, with the highest levels found in dark wildflower honey and manuka honey, disrupts the polysaccharide matrix that forms the shell of respiratory biofilms. It does not simply kill bacteria on the surface. It penetrates the protective matrix and destabilizes it from within. Simultaneously, the hydrogen peroxide produced by glucose oxidase in raw honey kills the bacteria inside the biofilm, without generating bacterial resistance, because the mechanism of action is nonspecific oxidative damage rather than a targeted molecular pathway that bacteria can evolve around. The second mechanism is the osmotic dehydration of biofilm. Honey's extraordinarily high sugar concentration creates an osmotic gradient that draws water out of the biofilm matrix, literally dehydrating and collapsing the structure. This is a purely physical mechanism that no bacteria can adapt to resist. The third mechanism is the reduction of goblet cell overproduction. The flavonoids in raw honey, primarily quercetin and camphorol, reduce the activity of NF-kappa B, the master inflammatory signaling molecule that keeps goblet cells in permanent overdrive. Less NF-kappa B activity means less inflammatory stimulus to the goblet cells. Fewer goblet cells in overdrive means less excess mucus being produced. 3 mechanisms, 1 ingredient. Available at any health food store or farmer's market for a few dollars. The second ingredient, fresh thyme, works through 4 mechanisms that directly complement the honey. The first mechanism is mucolytic action. Thymol and carvacrol, the 2 primary active phenols in thyme, directly break the protein bonds within mucus molecules. They reduce mucus viscosity more effectively than guafenicin in comparative laboratory studies. And unlike guafenicin, they work on both the liquid surface layer and on the outer structure of the biofilm matrix that the honey is simultaneously disrupting from the inside. The second mechanism is bronchodilation. Thymol relaxes smooth muscle in the walls of the bronchial tubes. The airways widen slightly, and mucus that was trapped in narrowed passages can move more freely. The effect is similar to a mild bronchodilator, without the cardiovascular side effects that pharmaceutical bronchodilators carry. The third mechanism is the one that commercial products ignore entirely: mucociliary stimulation. Carvacrol specifically stimulates the beat frequency of the cilia lining the airway epithelium. Cilia that were moving slowly begin moving faster. The natural clearing mechanism, the one that kept your airways perfectly silent when you were younger, begins to function more efficiently. Mucus that is thinned by thymol and loosened from biofilm by honey is now actively swept upward by cilia, moving it closer to their natural frequency. The fourth mechanism is antimicrobial penetration of biofilm. Thymol is one of the most potent natural antimicrobials ever studied, demonstrably effective against Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenza, and Staphylococcus aureus, all common respiratory tract colonizers. And unlike many antimicrobials, thymol penetrates the biofilm matrix. Combined with the honey's disruption of the biofilm structure, the result is a 2-pronged attack. Honey destabilizes the matrix from the outside, thymol kills the bacteria from within. This is why the combination works when either ingredient alone produces only partial results. The morning protocol: exact, simple, and replicable from tomorrow. Heat 250 milliliters of water to between 85 and 90 degrees Celsius, not boiling. Boiling water, 100 degrees, causes thymol to evaporate with the steam before it ever reaches your cup. If you do not have a thermometer, bring water to a boil and let it rest for 90 seconds. That brings it to approximately the right temperature. Add 1 tablespoon of fresh thyme leaves or 1 teaspoon of high-quality loose-dried thyme. Cover the cup immediately with a saucer. Thymol is volatile. It escapes with steam. Covering the cup during the infusion preserves it in the liquid. Steep for exactly 5 minutes, not 3, not 10. 5 minutes extracts the optimal concentration of thymol and carvacrol without over-extracting the bitter tannins. Remove the thyme. Allow the liquid to cool until you can comfortably hold your hand around the cup, approximately 60 degrees Celsius. This step is not optional. Above 60 degrees, the glucose oxidase enzyme in raw honey is destroyed. The methylglyoxal remains partially active, but you lose the hydrogen peroxide mechanism. Adding honey to hot liquid turns your remedy into a pleasantly flavored tea with reduced therapeutic value. When the liquid is at the right temperature, add 1 tablespoon of raw honey. Stir gently. Do not whisk or blend vigorously, as mechanical agitation can also damage the enzyme structure. Drink slowly over 10 minutes. Do not gulp. Slow drinking allows the honey and thymol to coat the mucosal surfaces of the throat progressively as the liquid passes. The timing is 30 minutes before breakfast on an empty stomach. The stomach acid environment, without food present, maximizes the absorption of thymol and carvacrol into the bloodstream and their distribution to the airway mucosa. The first week, 1 cup in the morning only. Observe how your body responds. Some people notice significant improvement in morning congestion within 5 to 7 days. Others, particularly those with established biofilm, feel little change in the first week because the biofilm disruption process requires consistent exposure over time before the structure begins to collapse. The second week, add an evening dose, 2 hours after dinner. This evening dose takes advantage of the nighttime mucociliary clearance window. When the body is at rest and not inhaling new irritants, the airways have their best opportunity to clear accumulated mucus. The thymol from the evening dose stimulates ciliary activity during the early hours of sleep, the hours when chronic mucus patients most commonly experience their worst congestion. The third and fourth weeks, full protocol. By day 14 to 18, most patients report the first significant change in their morning mucus, less volume, thinner consistency, and crucially, a reduction in the reflex that wakes them coughing. Do not add lemon juice. Lemon's acidic pH partially deactivates thymol by protonating the phenolic hydroxyl group, reducing its mucolytic and antimicrobial activity. Do not add milk. Milk proteins bind to the flavonoids in honey, reducing their bioavailability and their anti-inflammatory effect on goblet cells. Mr. Harold completed the full 21-day protocol. At the follow-up appointment, he described what I hear consistently from patients who do this correctly and consistently. The first week, minimal change, slight reduction in morning congestion. The second week, the morning mucus began to change in quality, still present but thinner, easier to clear with a single cough rather than prolonged throat clearing sessions. By day 18, the morning routine that had started his day for 3 years had changed completely. He woke up, had a moment of habitual throat-clearing reflex, and realized there was almost nothing there. At the 3-week mark, he sang in church. He told me at the follow-up, "Dr. Walker, I spent 3 years and more money than I want to admit on products that worked for a day. 2 ingredients from my kitchen solved what none of them could. I just needed someone to tell me how to use them." Leave me a comment with this phrase, "My lungs deserve to breathe freely. I'm starting the protocol tomorrow morning." The 5 mistakes that destroy the benefits of this protocol. The first, using boiling water. The most common mistake and the most damaging. At 100 degrees Celsius, thymol evaporates entirely before the infusion is complete. What remains in your cup is a thyme-flavored water with almost none of the active mucolytic compounds. Always between 85 and 90 degrees. The second, adding honey to hot liquid. The second most common mistake, and equally damaging. Above 60 degrees, the glucose oxidase enzyme that produces hydrogen peroxide is irreversibly destroyed. Add the honey only when the liquid is cooled enough that you can comfortably hold your hand around the cup. This step feels unnecessary until you understand the chemistry. Then it feels essential. The third, using commercial pasteurized honey. It looks identical to raw honey. It costs less, and it has been heated to temperatures that eliminate methylglyoxal activity, enzyme function, and the majority of the flavonoids. What remains is sugar water with a honey flavor. For culinary purposes, fine. For breaking down respiratory biofilm, completely useless. Raw honey only, from a source that specifies it is unheated and unfiltered. The fourth, using supermarket teabag thyme instead of loose leaves. Teabag thyme has been processed and packaged using industrial methods that involve heat, partially degrading the thymol content before the bag ever reaches your cup. Loose dried thyme from a herb store, pharmacy, or farmer's market retains significantly higher concentrations of active phenols. Fresh thyme leaves are even better. The fifth, stopping after 5 days because the improvement is not dramatic yet. Biofilm disruption is not a rapid process. The biofilm matrix took months or years to establish. It requires 14 to 21 days of consistent daily exposure to the anti-biofilm compounds before the structure collapses sufficiently for the body to clear it. Stopping at day 5 is like removing scaffolding from a building that is 40% demolished. The work stops, and what remains stabilizes and rebuilds. Consistency for the full 21 days is not optional. It is the mechanism. I want to close this video in a way I have never done in a clinical appointment. I want to write a letter, not to you, to your lungs. Dear lungs, we have asked so much of you, every breath since the day you first expanded, tens of millions of breaths, in clean air and polluted air, in cold and heat, through illness and recovery. You never stopped. You never asked for anything in return. And when you started to struggle, when the mucus began to accumulate, when the mornings became harder, when breathing freely became something that required effort instead of happening automatically, we gave you syrups that worked for a day. We gave you antihistamines that made things worse. We gave you the same inadequate answers year after year while you kept working, doing the best you could with what we gave you. You deserved better. You deserve someone to explain the biofilm, to explain why the cilia were slowing down, to explain that there was a combination, 2 ingredients that cost almost nothing, that could address what was actually happening inside you. Tomorrow morning, 30 minutes before breakfast, there will be a cup waiting, prepared at the right temperature, the honey added at the right moment, the thyme steeped for exactly the right amount of time, not because it is complicated, because you are worth the 3 minutes it takes to get it right. Breathe freely. That is what you were built for. And that is what starts tomorrow morning. If this video gave you something valuable, share it with someone who starts every morning clearing their throat, someone who has accepted chronic mucus as a permanent condition, someone who deserves to know that there is something real they can do about it, starting tomorrow. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. And in the next video, the 5 foods that almost every adult over 60 eats daily that dramatically increase airway inflammation and make chronic mucus significantly worse. Foods that appear completely harmless. Foods that are often labeled as healthy. A video that will change what you put on your plate. Do not miss it. Take care of yourself and take care of your lungs. Until next time.